Greetings, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland, and here I am in London in an area called Brent, because the River Brent, which is a tributary of the Thames, flows into the Thames a bit down that way. Brentford really. Brent is a bit further north. So this is where there was a ford in the River Brent. You can't see it from here, as in the river level was sufficiently low such that people could wade through the river. Well, there's actually the Thames I'm showing you, not the River Brent at the moment. So there are some fascinating old boats here, houseboats. I'm wondering, does somebody live here? There's quite a lot of stuff on it, some signs of human habitation, but I can't think how they get on and off it. And there's an abandoned old boat which is sinking into the mud a little bit up that way. I just thought there's some deranged person here hoarding things. Actually, if I turn on the lights, you'll see more of it. And then beyond that is an eyot. It's not the other bank of the Thames you're seeing, it's an eyot. Okay, so if I make it brighter, is that too bright? I think it is a bit too bright. Turn the brightness down. Look in there, you can see some things. I'll turn the brightness up. Do you see what I mean? An eyot, spelled E-Y-O-T, or indeed A-I-T. It's just pronounced just like the number 8, or as an 8, the past tense of to eat, is an island in the Thames, and only on the River Thames, not in any other river. And so I don't think that's been inhabited by humans for centuries. You could see that the banks are very slippery because the Thames is tidal as far inland as Teddington, which is that way, about another 10 miles as the river meanders. And this is partially submerged every day as the seawater comes in. And the river level does get a bit lower than this. Sometimes it looked like you could wade out, but I have tried wading in the Isis in Oxford. That's the Thames as it flows through Oxford, is known as the Isis. And there you get into it, well I got into it, and sinking, I think I'm a bit wet up to my knees, wet up to my waist, because I'm sinking in all the rotten leaves, the centuries of leaves that have fallen in there. So this is a pleasant and lovely area, a very historic area of Brent, but unfortunately the house that should have been preserved, where Pocahontas lived, where Percy Bysshe Shelley went to school, and so forth, where Turner lived, so many of these have been demolished. There's this old church here, which is disused 10 years ago, now been turned into quite smart flats overlooking the River Thames. So beyond this, on the other side of the eyot, is obviously the other channel of the River Thames, and beyond that, the south bank of the River Thames and Kew Gardens. Okay, that's a Royal Botanical Garden, which is huge, glorious and immaculately kept, with a huge greenhouse and so on, and a centre for phytosanitary research. Well, not so much now, but when they brought exotic plants and food and things like that, where rubber was first cultivated outside of Brazil was over there in Kew Gardens, when two Britishers in the 19th century, when they got a hold of some rubber seeds and they broke Brazilian law by smuggling them out of Brazil. Up until that point, Brazil was the only country in the world that could produce rubber. Rubber was needed for bicycles and other things, not just prophylactics, but car tyres, and cars were invented in 1885. But anyway, look at some of these abandoned old boats. Is it an eyesore? Should they remove this rusting old hulk? And then look at this one. How long has this been here? Since the age of steam. Look at that big engine. I wouldn't recommend getting onto it. It'd be very dangerous. They've got these big things to try and prevent people getting onto them. You can imagine some foolish young daredevil think it'd be exciting to get on there. So if you're venturesome, well, don't do it, because you could crash through that. It's very rusty. You can see how the weeds have been growing out of it for a century or more. And then these wooden, what would you call them? Poles here, moles there, so you could tie up. Perhaps there was a jetty a long time ago. And look at this boat's been abandoned there for decades, I suppose. This wooden jetty might be structurally unsound, which is why they're keeping you off it. But there's a big park area here, a little playground as well. So a lot of the flats here you'll see that are new. I'll show you some. When I was first coming around this area about 12 years ago, most of those didn't exist. Anyway, what else am I going to say? Yeah, there's a musical museum quite close to here. I went in here and years ago, and I listened to some of the curious tunes they were playing. There was some chap, I think it was a Swedish bloke, who he wanted to record the song of every species of bird in Europe, and go to a park to capture the bird song. But every time he did so, a dog would come along and start barking. So he accidentally recorded loads of dog barks. He was able to splice it together very cleverly to have the singing dogs and have dog barks singing various well-known melodies. Okay. Alvracht, what on earth does that mean? Okay, is that another abandoned boat? Who lives there? Did anybody live there? Are there these crazy people who live on these things? There are proper houseboats in a good state of repair, and they have to pump out their effluent every so often, take on board petrol and so on, and watch out for the petrol thieves who come along in the middle of the night, try to pump out your petrol, steal it, or is it diesel they use? I went to a show in the Edinburgh Festival, and some chap talked about his experience of living on a houseboat in the River Thames, and saying you must label pump out, as in your effluent to get rid of, and your diesel, I think it is, but he swapped the labels deliberately. So some thieves came along that night, he got a free pump out, usually costs you to pump out, and they'd been pumping human waste into their diesel tank. I don't think their boat went very well. But these boats cost as little as £50,000 to buy, but they're a lot of maintenance. You've got to pay to tie up. So look at this jetty, which is falling apart. It's a forgotten way of life, which is a pity actually. Fascinating when this was an artery of commerce and transport. So I'm just enthused by these things. I have this weakness for lost causes and a penchant for always looking back. Part of my hypothymesia. But this one, Island, spelt with a Y, this one is in very good nick, okay? It's obviously had a recent coat of paint. What a nice job they're doing. Unfortunately, these reeds are rather obscuring the vista, otherwise you would catch a better view of it. And remember there one being called Van Tromp, as in after the Dutch Admiral Cornelius Van Tromp. Really, it was Celephant's Tromp, as in the elephant's trunk. That was his surname. The celebrated 17th century Dutch admiral who defeated the English Royal Navy in the Anglo-Dutch Wars. I could go further up along the bank, have to go around those houses and show you more houseboats, but those ones are perhaps not so eye-catching or fascinating. They're not so mysterious. They don't invite so much conjecture and so many questions because they're in good condition and people live on them, and they have some sort of generator, and they'll get rid of their waste every so often. They'll have heating, electricity and things like that. And these ones, there's a story behind them, and I'm curious to know just how long have they been there? 100 years, 200 years? And up this way there's some sort of boatyard, you can't see it from here, a mile or so, where these things are repaired, where there's the confluence of the Brent and the River Thames, but you can see it's not flowing very fast today. Okay, so that's just a little bit of the bank of the River Thames at Brentford.